Hello and a very warm welcome to you wherever you may be. My name is Bayo Adewusi. Nigeria, without any fear of contradiction, is a blessed country. We have some of the finest brains in the world considering any field of human endeavor. Our population is growing, which presents a huge marketplace and a potential source of great wealth. Natural resources abound, and with judicious management, no Nigerian need go to bed hungry. Our people generally are friendly, particularly when it comes to relations with our neighbors and other African countries. Our big brother position has attracted both praise and condemnation. As we speak today, what are our foreign relations objectives? My guest today would shed more light on this and many other burning issues. He's qualified so to do, and you'll meet him if you don't go away. My guest is a lawyer by training and a politician by choice, a frontline member of the ruling party PDP. My guest was at one time the national secretary of the party. He was also a minister of transport under the Obasanjo administration, and now he presides over the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as minister. Please welcome Chief Ojo Madueke. Chief Madueke, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Bayo.
Yes, sir. Right now, you're Minister of Foreign Affairs, but as I said earlier on, you've had a checkered political career and experience. Talking about foreign affairs, we've had different strategy over the years. First of all, the concentration on Africa as pivotal to our foreign relations posture. What is it now?
Our policy remains very much defined by the centrality of Africa in our engagement, the concept of near abroad. We should be at peace with our neighbors. We should have influence with our neighbors. We should be able to get our neighbors to see our point of view. And since our people, Nigerians, are all over the continent, the welfare of our citizens is crucial. So as we engage our neighbors, our immediate neighbors, and the one beyond the ECOWAS region, we're able to achieve a convergence between a foreign policy that had long been defined by a sense of solidarity with the whole of Africa, being a country in which every fifth African is a Nigerian, and in the true spirit of being your brother's keeper, both for ethical reasons and for political reasons. Our demography was bound to define our geopolitics. And so we, from independence, in the glorious days of Tafawa Balewa, we made Africa the centerpiece of our foreign policy. In 2009, we are not about to jettison that concept, but we are making that policy a more matured policy. And we don't want a situation where the impression is given of a free lunch diplomacy or a foreign policy that is a Salvation Army writ large. We are looking at a foreign policy that at the end of the day, there has to be political ownership, citizen ownership, which was citizen diplomacy is all about. The Nigerian citizen should be able to know what is in it for him when we say Africa is the centerpiece of our foreign policy. So it's not a repudiation of our past policy. It's a maturation of our policy, especially now that you have many more drivers of foreign policy than was the case 50 years ago. Climate change, pandemics, even Niger Delta issue have become a foreign policy issue, and of course the whole issue of Millennium Development Goals. None of these things existed 50 years ago. So we now have a more integrated, a more complex, a more holistic, and can I say a more adult kind of foreign policy, and it's just as well because we're 50 years old.
Yes, but the thrust of it is still Afrocentric, is it? the thrust of our foreign policy is still Afrocentric.
It has to be, because geography defines our role.
Now, when you talk of citizen ownership, what do you expect the citizens to look up to or look forward to?
If we are good enough to die in Sierra Leone and Liberia, we should be good enough to tread there. Put simply, that's what it is.
Yes, sir. Since the days of Nigeria's independence, with, as you said, ethical role and natural role, we've played big brother. As a matter of fact, Nigeria was the only country that was not contiguous to the fighting in southern Africa that became a frontline state. But history also shows us that we really never reaped when it was time to do so. Are you saying all of that has become a thing of the past?
Very good question, Bayo. When the unfortunate xenophobic attacks took place against Nigerians in South Africa, in as much as the then Mbeki administration condemned it strongly, in fact went as far as mobilizing the army out there on the street to protect foreigners, including Nigerians. I said to my South African colleagues, in a statement that got a lot of publicity, that what has happened is that we have a generation of South Africans who have not been told the story of what Nigeria did in the liberation of Southern Africa. The conversations have not been taking place. And so the absence of history has led to the presence of hysteria. And what we are trying to do through citizen diplomacy is to ensure that wherever we have showed our strategic reach by making sacrifices, by engaging diplomatically, and even in many cases by the sacrifice of our soldiers, peacekeeping and so on and so forth. We want those countries to know that it is in the mutual interest of all that the Nigerian in whose name those sacrifices were made must be treated with dignity, that the green passport should be a badge of honor and not an invitation for humiliation, and that we have the resources, we have the capacity, and indeed we have the prospects to be nice to those people who are nice to us, and the obvious implications of the contrary. The time has come for us to work with a little more aplomb and self-confidence. Too often what has happened is that an altruistic foreign policy, or let me rephrase it, an altruistic implementation of a foreign policy that basically contained the geostrategic dynamics that could have made Nigeria benefit and leverage on the goodwill arising from its continental reach. That altruistic implementation didn't ask any questions, saw no evil, had no evil, and didn't speak about any evil. We just made sacrifices, packed our boots, and came home. And so when we move away, other players move in. And
reap where they didn't sow.
Exactly. So thank God, in the life of this administration, under the leadership of President Yar'Adua, who has given me tremendous support in a more robust foreign policy that indeed reflects on the 7-point agenda as a way of building on the inherent strength of the Nigerian nation. We are now moving into a more accountable kind of diplomacy in which we just don't make interventions, make sacrifices, we pack our boots and come back home. It's not a question of reminding benefactors or beneficiaries of the Nigerian benefactor on a daily basis of how to be grateful. There's a diplomatic way of ensuring that conversations are sustained that do not lead to the absence of history that could provoke the kind of hysteria that led to the loss of Nigerian lives in South Africa.
So could all this flack that we receive from, first of all, let's deal with the African countries, could it be as a result as we conduct ourselves? Because even though you say our foreign policy is Afrocentric and should be as a result of our geographical position, the image of the Nigerian seems to invite a lot of envy from other Africans. First of all, as you said, 1 in every 5 Nigerians one in every 5 Africans is a Nigerian, and the colossal wealth that we are deemed to have, which has not been properly utilized, is also a source of worry for most African countries. How do we fine-tune this so that instead of becoming a butt of attack, we become a shining star?
When you are tall, even without you doing anything about it, that's an invitation already for a response. And the response could be admiration. The response can also be resentment. Sometimes it is both. If you're a front runner, you attract mixed feelings. America is a good example. All the other big nations of the world are good examples. So I think here we need to strike a balance. That balance is to avoid being sentimental about this thing. Relationship between nations is not exactly the same as relationship between a man and a woman. There's nothing romantic about it. It's about real politic. It's about a clearly articulated appraisal of what are your core interests. So when you are resented, you don't take it personal. What you now have to do is to let the other person know that that resentment can be quite costly for them, and that by working with you and leveraging with you, that there is a lot to benefit from it. And you move on from there. I'll just give an example of the changing fortunes of international relations as it affects a country like Nigeria, which is, as I said, the front runner is tall, and so people admire Nigeria, also resent it. Today, we had to move into Guinea-Bissau to help that country from imploding after the unfortunate assassination of both its chief of defense staff and the president. Within less than 24 hours, the president of Nigeria asked me as chairman of ECOWAS, which he is, to go to Guinea-Bissau. Now, we are working closely with them to make sure they conduct elections, to make sure, and they are looking up greatly to us. But some 20 years ago, we wanted to be on the UN Security Council. And in spite of all that we had done for Guinea-Bissau, even at that time, they fought us 5 times for a seat in the UN Security Council. You know, and it had to be voted 5 times in New York before we prevailed and got there. We had the same experience with Niger Republic. And you know our close affinity with Niger, just across the border. And for United Nations Security Council. In fact, recently, a few weeks ago, Niger gave us a strong challenge on who is to be president of International Fund for Agricultural Development. The Nigerian, who was vice president of the FAD, was a front-runner for the job. Niger insisted they must present a candidate. In fact, ECOWAS ruled in favor of Nigeria. But when we went to AU, Niger fought us to the end. Does that mean we are going to close our borders to Niger? No. Does that mean we won't continue to supply them with electricity? No. But it only means that even as we supply electricity to Niger, as we work with them on many other issues, we let them know that diplomacy is about interest. And their interest and that of Nigeria are so closely tied that why do you get involved in dissipation of energies? It's just about improving the conversations and being more calibrated in our responses.
Yes, but don't they know this? Don't they know that there's mutuality? Don't they know that there's a lot to benefit by being on our right side? Why then do they want to take us on?
Why not? It's a free world and a very competitive one. Ask America why it gets challenged by countries. It shed thousands of the lives of thousands of Americans. So look at France, for instance. I don't know of any, in the Western Hemisphere, I don't know any other country that has continued to niggle at America more than France. But go back to the landings of Normandy and so on and so forth. So, but America doesn't take it personal. When it wants things to be done and it needs France, it still go to France and say, look, can we be on the same page? It just means that you have to be more alert in your diplomacy. You have to articulate their positions well in advance, because sometimes that's also what causes the problem for us in our relations with other countries in Africa. We take it for granted that because we made those sacrifices, once we want a thing, even at the last minute, presto, they will jump. No. We should signal our interest long in advance. And that is what the new Minister of Foreign Affairs is now beginning to do.
Constructive engagement.
Exactly, constructive engagement. Are we doing it well enough? Not as much as I would like to do. Are we getting on to speed on these issues? It's improving, but not yet fast enough. But altogether, by the time I'm through there, I believe that we are going to have a more nimble foreign policy engagement, a better articulated foreign policy engagement, one that encapsulates all the drivers in today's foreign policy by any modern nation, not just Africa, qua Africa, but climate change, pandemics, resource control, resource allocation, fight against poverty, and indeed the fate of the diaspora. Because we have 17 million Nigerians in diaspora, and we are the largest black country on earth. That ought to be a foreign policy issue.
So I think it was President Kennedy of the United States who said at one time that diplomacy and military might shouldn't be substitutes for each other. For as long as you're willing to talk, the other people, the other players, must also know that you have sufficient force that you can use when required. Now, are we in that position? Let's take the African setting. Are we in that position in which our military can engage to our benefit?
Well, the records in the field are quite clear that Nigeria remains, in a manner that is matchless or peerless, the number one peacekeeping nation in Africa. We are now the largest peacekeeping contingent in Darfur. We stabilize Liberia and Sierra Leone, and there's standing request for us to move into Somalia.
Yeah, but at what cost, Mr. Minister?
Well, again, as I said, we are not a Salvation Army just doing charity all over the place. What is our interest? If we didn't go to Sierra Leone or Liberia, what you'll have had in Nigeria would have been an influx of refugees in Nigeria that will strain our social economic fabric, and that might even become a security problem for us. Ditto Darfur, So, first is that it's in our own interest. Okay. But the thing, as I said, is to leverage on that. And on the issue of peacekeeping, for instance, on many occasions when the international community wanted to beat on us, for the wrong reasons, in my opinion, at least not we were not as guilty as charged, not completely, but whether it's on sheer human rights, supposed human rights violation or electoral inelegancies, if I may put it that way.
Okay.
They tended to hold back by saying, wait a minute, this is number one global regional stabilizer. These guys have done well in peacekeeping. Let's not push them too hard, because we need a country like Nigeria to keep Africa secure and stable. So what that means is that we have the military muscle. But then that military muscle will continue to be a reflection on the state of our economy. It will continue to be a reflection on the state, on how comprehensive our state capacity is. Because it's not enough to be 140 million people. You have to be able to equip your military better if the economy is growing. And that means that all available hands are at work. And that means you are training people in school, you are equipping them for today's marketplace, and they are doing well. But above all, there's the intangible, which I think is the glue to all this, that the Nigerian himself must increasingly begin to appreciate God's gift of Nigeria to him, and know that a radical Nigerianness is a necessary condition for being able to make the kind of impact we should be making overseas. You cannot give what you don't have. If you don't think much of yourself, there's not much prospect of others thinking highly of you. If you run yourself down at every opportunity and make yourself look like you're the worst country on earth, these things get onto the international system, including airports all over the world. What Nigerians say about Nigeria, even the immigration official in Heathrow Airport or in Atlanta gets to know about that. So the first thing he'll do when you're in a long line of people coming to that country is to say,
Nigerians stand apart.
Could you step aside to be searched? You could be wearing a collar as a priest, and yet he will think that that collar has cocaine stuffed inside it, because you've already condemned yourself as the worst kind of country.
So, but let me ask you this. Nigerians, to the best of my mind, hold themselves very proudly with a lot of dignity. But quite a number of Nigerians have complained, particularly when they're in foreign lands, that the government, the sovereign authority, the government of Nigeria, hardly ever comes to their aid and assistance. And that seems to promote the negative things that foreign officials and governments do to us. How do you intend to correct the situation?
I'm very cautious about that, Bayo. And in fact, it is that acknowledgement that there's a problem there. That's what led to the birth of citizen diplomacy, in which the citizen is the focus and is the foreign policy equivalent of President Yar'Adua's governance ethic of servant leadership. If my boss himself, the President of Nigeria, told people of Nigeria he is a servant leader, the servant leadership, then his envoys for overseas must see themselves as the chief servant of the Nigerian community there. And I have told our ambassadors, we respect them, they're important people, many of them have held very key position before in government. But the days of the fortress ambassador is over. Our ambassadors must see themselves as part of the Nigerian community they serve. They must not think that they are on extended vacation at the expense of the taxpayer, stay in a gilded cage in which they are too big to know what's happening to the Nigerian community. We've made it clear, and we have given instruction about citizen diplomacy desk on the website, so that if there are complaints in terms of service delivery, which is really what often it amounts to, from any embassy, there'll be consequences.
All right, so let me just very quickly take two examples of the seeming inaction or late action on the part of the Nigerian government. Some half-Nigerian who was executed recently in Thailand, and a Nigerian ship that has been held by Somali pirates. We saw the way America reacted. Why can't Nigeria come forth as smoothly and as swiftly as that?
Because we're not America.
Yes, but we're regional power, you claim.
We had to get there one day. That's a good question, Bayo, and I've had cause to make one or two explanations about that. The truth of the matter, and we have to be honest about this, is that over the years, the Nigerian Navy, the capacity of the Nigerian Navy got degraded. That is a fact. The world knows that, so we can't pretend about that. We don't have that capacity to have warships start steaming over to Somalia. And even when they steam over to Somalia, what did they do? When the USS Bainbridge got there, and with all the armada of so many warships all over the place, the pirates were still able to capture the American crew. And even after the rescue operation, the pirates are still capturing hostages. But you could see that standoff for 4 days. The most powerful navy in the world just couldn't almost do anything for 4 days. Of course, because they were highly trained, they are Navy SEALs. These people they get the kind of training that we are yet to develop the capacity for here. And they have seen battles, they have fought all over the world, many of these type of people. For 4 days, they had to wait for the appropriate moment. Of course, facilitated by the heroism of the captives themselves, of the ship captain. They had to wait for the appropriate moment when the snipers could take those pirates one by one. That's what I mean by state capacity. We're building in that direction. It's all part of the 7-point agenda. Now, did it mean we went to sleep when these people were captured? No. We went to now engage diplomatically to see to the release of these hostages. And these are things we cannot say in the open because it could compromise our own national security. It could also compromise the security of our global partners who are helping us in this. Because if the push comes to shove, it means that soldiers from those countries will have to risk their lives to save our own people's lives. And we shouldn't compound that risk by going blah, 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 blah to say this is what we have done, we are talking with this person. And the sooner our people understand that, and don't blame the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and don't blame the government to say we are doing nothing. Because the danger in blaming us is that in order to defend ourselves, we feel the pressure to come out now and say this is what we have done. Now, I have resisted that pressure. I would rather suffer criticisms that I have done nothing or the ministry have done nothing than compromise the lives of those Nigerians who, even though the ship they came with, it's not a Nigerian ship. It's important to emphasize that it's not a Nigerian ship. We didn't hide behind the fig leaf or legality to say, well, it's not a Nigerian ship. Because of citizen diplomacy, we said there are Nigerians who are involved, and we have, from within the first week this happened, been extensively involved in diplomatic, security, collaborative efforts with countries that must not be named to see what can happen. Now,
so there's a lot of secrecy, sir, involved in diplomacy.
A lot has to be. Even by countries that have stronger institutions of state that can either through espionage make sure that the leakage of information does not do much damage. There's still not everything that come out. In America, you had a lot of classified documents that get declassified many years after, and our experience cannot be different. So a lot is being done in that respect. But the one we could do openly is the one of Nigerians who have been convicted for drugs. And in these countries, and there's need for our Nigerians to appreciate that. Countries have their own laws. If you go to another country and you break the laws of that country, you should be ready for the consequences of it. Don't turn around and say, "Hey, citizens."
Yes, but still, you must protect your citizens,
yes,
even if at the end of the day they lose.
I agree. That's precisely what we did in the case of Indonesia. Listen, about Indonesia, 3 Nigerians were going to be executed for drugs because they execute their own nationals. And the question here is that if countries execute their own nationals for carrying drugs, what would be the basis for Nigeria going to ask that country, don't execute our own nationals? And as soon as you come to some of these airports, on your passport, they stamp it there. Carrying drug carries death penalty. And some Nigerian citizens still go and carry drugs. What are we going to do? Are we going to go to war with these countries? Because they're implementing their own laws, which is also affecting their own countries. Yet, we went beyond that. In the case of Indonesia, I sent for the Indonesian ambassador and pleaded with him. And for any country, for the foreign minister to have to invite an ambassador to plead with him. Not even sending him to any of the ambassadors in my office. But I called him myself. I invested the entire authority of Nigeria and said, don't execute those 3 young men. They were executed within a month after I made, because it wasn't me that was turned down, it was Nigeria. That should have stopped us. But we didn't stop there. I went back to the president and said, about 20 others are on the death row and may soon be executed. We have no reason to believe if we couldn't save 3, we can save 20. But we must be doing something. And the president agreed with me. We should be doing, and allowed me to go to Indonesia with a special letter from him as a special envoy to the president of Indonesia, who happened not to be in the country. But time was of the essence. We didn't want to wait till the president would be in town. So I met with the vice president, who received the letter on behalf of the president. I met with the attorney general. I met with the president of Senate. Because of that intervention, those young men have not been executed as of date. That is citizen diplomacy. For now, we've been able to save their lives. Will they execute them eventually?
Time will tell.
I wish they will not. But at least they have not been executed. So it's not like we've not been doing anything. We've been doing a lot. Some are like Indonesia. Well, in Thailand now, they executed the person you're talking about. But we're going to save some lives in Indonesia. Now, if our own people do not cooperate, what you are going to have is the Nigerian foreign minister junketing from one capital or the other in the countries that have death penalty for drug pushing, going on his knees begging for not executing these Nigerians. If that, what I may call supplicant diplomacy, will help to save those lives, I don't mind doing that. But you can see the implications it has in terms of damage for our stature, damage even for our foreign policy, damage for our dignity as a nation, including our capacity to get the attention of the international community. If the foreign minister goes around begging, and the answer to his begging is to still go ahead and execute those Nigerians.
Well, Mr. Minister, sir, we'll take a break right here. Well, viewers, thank you very much for spending part of your time with us. This is One-on-One for this day with the chief nomad of the nation. That is the the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chief Ojo Madueke. We'll take a break right here, and when we come back, we'll move to other areas.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for spending part of your time with us. This is One-on-One for this day with Chief Ojo Madueke, the Foreign Affairs Minister. Sir, yes, we don't expect you to dissipate your time traveling from one capital to the other and be humiliated in the process. But another wrongdoing that a lot of Nigerians...
It's not me. Nigeria being humiliated in the process.
Okay, but you are a representative. Is human trafficking, that has come to the fore in the past few years. Is this very worrying for you as the minister, the ministry, and Nigeria?
It's very worrying. Again, this is where we need to do a lot at home. And this doing a lot is not just the role of government. Come on. That young girl that goes to Italy, and the parents know that she's not engaged in any meaningful job in Italy. To call a spade, she's into prostitution. And she's sending huge sums of money. At least huge in terms of
the Nigerian standard.
The relative standard of that home. Mm. And Mama is now riding an SUV, and Daddy is able to do a big birthday bash, and so on. And nobody's asking any question. If that family now decides to build one wing of the church, that is under construction, even the pastor will not ask questions. What does that do to our moral fabric? What does it do even to, as example, to other young people who are saying, well, Angelina is sending Houston some money from Italy. Maybe whatever Angelina can do, I can also do better. I may even go to Denmark because that's another port of call. The naming and shaming inherent in our culture, we are losing that. What are the traditional rulers doing as the custodians of our culture to say, no, this is not a Nigerian thing, that our daughters will go to foreign lands to prostitute? If the problem is poverty in Nigeria, we have never, it's not part of our culture to confront poverty through criminality. We work hard to confront poverty, and every country has its own share of poverty. I don't say that the poor should be abandoned, but to resort to things that shame the nation is not acceptable. Or the young man who goes into drugs, or indeed a 419 person, nobody asks questions, just the money comes, he's given a chieftaincy title. Church leaders, traditional rulers don't ask any question.
So we must revisit our values.
And then the election comes, that's the person that is voted for to go to wherever. We must begin to show in our value system that we reject a life of crime, and that most Nigerians are honest people, that are decent, that are hardworking, and that can confront the poverty challenges they have to be somebody tomorrow. Each one of us who is where we are now, we have stories to tell. It was not always so easy. My father was a village pastor. I know what that means in those days. But I'm foreign minister of my country today.
Okay, very quickly, Chief Madueke, let's take a look at the economic scene. We seem to hear discordant voices from particularly the so-called developed countries. There was a time we were invited as observers to the G8 and the G20. In the recent past, we haven't. Is that because of frosty relations, or is that because of dwindling economic fortunes, or perceived lack of leadership?
No, none of the above. The G20 is merely a numerate response for a global town hall meeting, and we need not lose sleep over that. And the president's justifiable statement on that issue, which again many commentators unfairly, in my opinion, turned it into a tool of vilifying the president, was intended as a candid and honest, and I would say a humble invitation for self-reflection. It wasn't an indictment of the nation under President Yar'Adua. It was an invitation to his fellow countrymen and women that could we do more to narrow the gap between promise and performance, that the inherent dynamics of the Nigerian state are there to make us the biggest economy in Africa. We are not the biggest economy in Africa. We don't want to make excuses for that, and we don't want to think in terms of a sister country like South Africa that was invited. We are not jealous that they were invited. We complement each other. But for goodness sake, even before the end of apartheid, the South African economy was already a first world economy. The reasons you know very well. Yes. Okay, now, under apartheid, they had their power needs. Under apartheid, they had huge infrastructure. And we believe the post-apartheid government is doing well to build on that. But in a way, that gave them a head start. Because you're talking about a European economy that was in Africa. So to now compare ourselves and say, why South Africa, why Nigeria, it's only useful to the point of enabling us now move faster in terms of the power infrastructure, road infrastructure, and all the other indicators of really building a modern state. But that is not to make us now begin to run ourselves down or lose self-esteem. Because whether it's South Africa or indeed any other country, I want to repeat what I said at the State Department when Secretary of State Larry Clinton invited me for a meeting. That, look, even though the issue of South Africa was not discussed, but I said it clear, and I said it also in Moscow to the Russian Foreign Minister, that there may be many gateways to Africa. Nigeria is the ultimate destination.
Sir, very well said. Nigeria may be the ultimate destination, but a lot of there's, as you must be very well aware of, perception in diplomacy and foreign relations seems to be everything. Nigeria, for whatever reasons, is perceived as a corrupt nation, a nation in which corruption makes it difficult for normal business to thrive. Now, I want to place in focus the activities of a young man called Nuhu Ribadu. He was seen by the outside world as doing a lot to stem the tide of corruption in this country. The way he was eventually treated and what was meted out to him seemed to change the perception, particularly in the Western world. Has that caused you some sleepless nights, sir?
These are problems of transitions which this government is handling very well. And I have been on record many times to say quite clearly that as part of the administration at very senior level, I was part of the administration that came in 1999, and which Nuhu Ribadu later on joined in terms of being the anti-corruption czar. We showed an unprecedented political will in confronting the issue of corruption. That's what led to the establishment of the various legislation that created ICPC and then EFCC. Now, after 8 years of the last administration, a successor administration which in many ways, is organically linked to the previous one, beyond just being PDP government. Which is why someone like me was there, and I'm also in this one. Naturally will improve on the record of the past one. Things like rule of law will come in to engage the fight against corruption in a more orderly manner, in a more procedural manner, in a more sustainable manner. The understandable messianism of the past is bound to yield to a more structured, a more rule-driven approach of the present. The personality-driven nature of the fight in the past, and every great initiative like this requires strong egos, strong personalities who can be quite dramatic to draw attention to both the problem and the success.
Yes, but I'm concerned about perception.
It's bound to give way now to institutional. So the emphasis now, the difference, and I don't see this in comparative terms, I see in complementary terms. The difference that we have now moved from the charisma of the individual in fighting corruption to the competence of an institution and institutional integrity. So, but too often, both many communities in Nigeria and also our friends in the West tend to confuse issues on here.
Yes, but in bringing about this transition, were you sufficiently cognizant of perception? Couldn't it have been done differently? This transition from personality focused to institutionally driven.
We don't have the luxury of worrying about that, but we have the opportunity of sustaining the fight against corruption, of doing another page in the fight against corruption, a page that will be better than yesterday's page. And to me, that's a more productive way of engagement.
All right, sir. Shortly before we started the interview officially, we had cause to talk about the Nigerian civil war. I asked you if you believed in the entity called Nigeria, and you said very much so. But the bitterness, you said there was no victor and no vanquished. But from what transpired, if we correctly gleaned what transpired between yourself and our former ambassador to the United States, one believes that the issue of ethnicity or tribalism hasn't completely disappeared. Or do we read you wrongly? Or do we read the incident wrongly?
Well, I have maintained a public posture, and quite often also a private one, of not commenting on that unfortunate incident. And I don't think I should deviate from that. To the extent that your question refers...
It's about to enlighten us, to enlighten us to the extent that Nigerians are sure.
Okay, I can answer in general terms,
Yes.
but not about the incident you are referring to.
Okay.
In general terms, I can say that the issue of, national unity, national integration, and seeing ourselves as one people with a common destiny is the responsibility of all of us on a continuing basis. And here, there could be no better response than leadership by example. Particularly all those of us who have the privilege of serving the nation in a prominent, quite visible public arena. We must, by what we say privately and what we say publicly, we must, by the actions that define what we do, show that for us, Nigeria is the key. What I call a radical Nigerianness. And for the integrity, for me, the integrity here is even is more what has been defined as what you do when nobody's looking. When you, as a minister, you have the file before you and you are dealing with it, are you scratching your head to say, I'm a minister who happens to be Igbo. Therefore, my response to this file is going to be based on whether the name before me is Okonkwo or Ahmed or indeed Bayo. Now, when you are thinking like that, when you have no business being a minister, two, you are a setback to the Nigerian project. But you know something, Bayo? I'm very optimistic that we have a greater number of people who know that the synergy called Nigeria is far bigger than the energy of each and every one of us. And my humanity as Ojo Madekwe, my fulfillment as Ojo Madekwe is definitely far more enriched by my Nigerianness than by my Igbo-ness. It is not at the expense of my Igbo-ness. It enhances my Igbo-ness, which God has given me as a cultural garment, as a cultural expression in terms of vernacular, in terms of certain customs and so on. I relish that, but that Igbo-ness is reinforced and is celebrated in a context where the Yoruba, the Hausa, the Nupe can join me in celebrating who I am and my identity and my celebrating who they are. So the micro identity that makes me Igbo and makes you Yoruba or makes the other person Hausa or the other one Fulani is useful, but must be seen as having the likeliest prospect of being valuable if it is under the mega identity called Nigeria. And that's my own defining philosophy of life publicly.
Mr. Minister.
It's based on that I'm optimistic about Nigeria, that Nigeria is only getting stronger and stronger. It's going to be a better place, and the future of Nigeria, to me, is assured. Nigeria is a Catholic marriage.
No divorce. Mr. Minister, I believe that someday we are going to do this again because it's unbelievable the way time is flying. But let me take a text message from Sule in Abuja. And very quickly, Mr. Minister, why are embassies abroad underfunded? Some diplomats complain of salary arrears for months and months.
Thank you. It's a thing of the past now, I assure you. Since January this year, President Yar'Adua has kindly acceded to my request that the ministry should take back responsibility in sending funds to the mission. You're surprised to know that before I came in, that responsibility was with the Ministry of Finance. After appropriation, the money that you sent to missions were allowed to be in finance, to be sent to them. And this had to do with certain problems of capacity in the past in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, when I assured the President that we have the capacity to send those money and send them on time, he granted our request, and things have improved since then. Because my argument was, and it was accepted, that if we are going to have responsibilities to make sure that the missions are funded on time and with the money from appropriation, that we must have the power to do so. So there have been a new realignment between the power and the responsibility of the ministry. And so things have improved. But let me also add a caveat there that the government has to deal with not only foreign affairs, but with healthcare, with education, with infrastructure.
Yeah, we understand
this
that, Minister.
is not a rich country.
Yes,
the sooner we understand that we are potentially rich, and that the issue is not one, as we thought in the past, that our problem is not money, but how to spend it. Then we will, one, cut down wastages, ensure corruption is fought to the standstill, even in our missions, that any loophole for corruption is confronted, and that whatever money that we have as a ministry and through the mission are judiciously applied. Because at the end of the day, government has to worry about other sectors of the economy.
Very quickly, sir, Ngozi from Abia says, what are you doing to address the treatment of Nigerians abroad? Like the handcuff of a Nigerian deportee in a foreign airline, a British Airways experience in 2008, where a Nigerian was deported in handcuffs, and because the other passengers protested, the plane was delayed for hours on end.
Maybe she didn't follow the news on this. As it concluded, the news did relay that I summoned the British High Commissioner, which in diplomatic lingo is a serious matter. He registered our displeasure over it, and that an apology was offered.
Okay, so very quickly, sir, the Nigerian house in New York is reported to be in a state of disrepair. Is that a thing of the past?
Well, it took many years to get to that sorry condition. And I'm happy to mention to you that there's a policy now to literally think out of the box, to put funds on it and fix it. And very soon you are going to find a completely changed building that will be a pride not only to Nigeria but Africa. That is top on my priority on what to do. But again, the difficulty between now were funding problems, but we have crossed that hurdle now.
Okay, Chief Madueke, you're very fortunate Nigerian. You have been minister, you have been senator, you have been secretary to the party. Are you one of these Nigerians who think that they have to keep in the system? I mean, when like others do you intend to say, I have run the race, I've played my part, it's time to do a little coasting?
Bayo, thank you very much. That's a good question. First of all, I haven't been this long just because I'm extraordinary or I'm the best, I'm the most talented. It's just by the sheer awesome grace of God. Because except for when I sought to go to the Senate, in which case, in a thing like that, you present yourself to the people and ask for their votes, you campaign. None of the things you have mentioned was as a result of my campaigning or asking for or lobbying. Somehow, our leaders saw what I did in the previous job and asked me to come and do the next one. And for me, without my contriving it, public service has become my vocation. It doesn't mean there's no life for me outside government. And definitely one looks forward to the day when I can spend some time with my grandchildren. But for now, I have the privilege and indeed the responsibility of serving this beautiful country and giving the best time of my life to Nigeria. It's a great privilege. I thank God for that. I thank President Yar'Adua for that. I thank former President Obasanjo for giving me an initial start in 1999. And I think it's payback time to the people of Nigeria by my redoubling my effort to serve this wonderful country.